I want to give a shout out to the KC Clay Guild for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. Also want to encourage everyone to apply for their annual T-Bowl National, which will be juried this year by Erica Iman. This is always a great show with pieces ranging from tea bowls for the Japanese tea ceremony to sculptural interpretations of that iconic drinking vessel. This year's exhibition will have a $500 Best in Show, as well as other prizes including purchase and equipment awards. Apply before their June 25th deadline at kcclayguild.org/apply. Hey, Red Clay Rambler fans, we just passed the 9th birthday of the show, so to help celebrate that, I'm asking you to contribute $9 to support our new season. You can get involved by making a donation through the PayPal portal at talesofredclayrambler.com/donate, or you can make a monthly pledge at patreon.com/redclayrambler. If you join Patreon today, you can access perks like t-shirts, water bottles, and other podcast swag, as well as having access to the Patreon-exclusive Tales from the Vault podcast, which features remastered episodes that are no longer available on major podcast apps. Thanks for listening and being a part of this Red Clay Rambler community. With your support, I can keep the show rolling into its new 10th season. So thanks again, and let's get on with the show. Welcome to the Tales of a Red Clay Rambler podcast, featuring interviews with culture makers from around the world. This is Ben Carter. I'm going to be your host. If you'd like more information on the show, please visit our website, talesofaredclayrambler.com. Welcome back to episode 373 of the podcast. Thank you guys for tuning in. Today on the show, I talk with Amy Smith, who is a potter based in Lincoln, Nebraska. She makes porcelain pots that are decorated with delicately drawn female nudes. In this interview, we talk about the influence of running and movement on her work, as well as the emotive power of the drawn figure. If you guys would like to see examples of that work, you can go to amysmithporcelain.com. Before we get to that interview, I wanted to mention that I'll be taking part in the next Ceramic Congress. That's going to be starting next Thursday night, May the 27th, and run through the weekend, which is the 31st. This is a 5-day online ceramic festival, and the host of this year's Ceramic Congress is Canada. So I'm going to be taking part by interviewing Greg Pace and Katrina Chater. If you would like to be a part of the interview, it is only $10 to register for the whole 5-day conference, so we would love to have you in the audience for that. To register or to find out more about the lineup of artists that will be demonstrating, lecturing, and participating in open panels, you can find that at ceramic.school-the-ceramics-congress. Without further ado, we'll get to the interview. Yeah, so let's start talking about how you started to focus on the female figure as subject matter.
Yeah, so what was interesting is I was teaching at UNL, and University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And obviously I have my MFA in ceramics, and, I was teaching some ceramics classes here and there when they needed me, but I was actually teaching more drawing classes than anything else. And my favorite class to teach is Drawing 101 for non-majors. So they're good students, they come to class, they expect homework, and they want to do well. And so love teaching that class. And I just felt like, here I am doing all of this teaching with these students, and this might be their only drawing class that they ever take. It might be their only art class that they ever take. And so I wanted them to have a really good experience with that, and feel accomplished. And with all of the teaching that I was doing, I just felt like, well, I need to be doing more drawing myself. So of course I'm an artist. I'm making my own work. I have my studio practice, but I just thought that I needed to be doing more drawing. So I signed up to do a residency at Hambridge, and it's a really amazing place where they protect your studio time. You're not allowed to just walk over and like knock on someone's door and be like, "Hey, what you working on?" So they have this structure where you have your cabin, you have your studio, and the time that you get to interact with the other residents is dinner time. So they have a chef that prepares dinner. You come, have some wine, set the table, get ready, and then the chef comes out, tells you what you're having for dinner, and then that's your visiting time. And if you invite someone into your studio, of course they can come, but it's a very protected, quiet, there's like no Wi-Fi. So you can't even get a phone call on the mountain. So it's a secluded residency. I've never experienced anything like it before. All the other residencies were so much about community. Obviously they were clay residencies, and this center has all different types of artists. So I was there with, a poet, a creative writer, a composer, myself, a sculptor, etc. So it was an amazing time to sit down and focus on combining drawing with ceramics. And it really was just packing up, going down there, being in the studio all alone and figuring it out.
And when was that you did that residency?
That was in 2015. So the figurative work we're coming up to 5 years. No, six. Is it six?
Oh, yeah, yeah. I guess it would be 6, yeah.
Wow, that's crazy. So yeah, I feel like I've always loved the figure as a subject, since my first drawing class, since my first figurative drawing class, I have just fell in love with the figure and always loved it, and always have a chapter of that, even in my drawing 101 class. But to incorporate it into my work specifically, it was so exciting.
So when you are in the position of being in a resident somewhere and you're totally focused on just your work, that's very different than your daily life where you're a mother, you're a partner, you're a teacher, you're a maker, like that was probably the most isolated you'd been in a long, long time.
Yes, it was.
So how do you think that isolation sounds like a bad word. How do you think that focus that you could achieve in the studio changed the way your thought process worked?
There was only myself to bounce an idea off of. Usually when you're at a residency, there's someone right next to you, or there's someone in the next, stall. And you can be like, "Hey, what do you think of this?" Or, think about grad school when you have your studio mate. You might sort of have, a system that works for you guys. But I was in a studio with Michael Strand my first semester of graduate school. We had our sort of boundaries and rules for ourselves, but at the same time, we allowed this ability to just sort of blurt out what we were thinking. And I remember one time he's like, "You're not gonna cover that lineup, are you?" I was like, "Yes, I am. Why?" So we reserved the, ability to interrupt each other, which was great. I think it allows for learning. So yeah, I only had myself, and that was different. And even just being at home, sometimes I'll ask my kids, "What do you think about this?" Or, "Should I apply to this show?" And it's really fun to see what they say, and sort of what follows from that.
So in terms of confidence, when you're working on a new body of work, do you feel confident exploring, or do you feel more confident once the objects are finished and they're in the gallery?
Oh, definitely exploring. No question. I think I'm a pretty slow maker. I think I'm a thoughtful, considerate, take my time, really look at the work. I'm definitely not a production potter. Um, and I mean, that shows. I mean, that shows from what you were saying in the very beginning when we were just chit-chatting before we started, such that you usually see one piece at a time. And I think that's indicative of the work.
So I think about your work in two veins. You have this carved body of work, often sort of open forms, and I think those relate to either ice or you can fill that part in. But then there's also the figurative work. So how do you think these two things line up?
Yeah, that's very easy. So the carved work, of course, that's from graduate school. That's what I sort of discovered when I was, working through grad school, and it was always about the body and running and rhythm and movement and those types of things. So whether it's going hiking and exploring a stream, when I was teaching in Vermont, or jumping in the cold water or whatever it was. I grew up and we would vacation. We would just go tent camping on Lake Michigan. And so, all of that, all of the carved work or the open forms, all of that is about, the sky, the wind, running where I grew up, and, all like the body being in an environment and experiencing the environment. And, the carved forms, those of course reference waves, wind and waves. And so then to transition to the figure itself, all that really was turning the camera, onto the individual experiencing the environment. And it's just it's more intimate in terms of the subject matter for how people perceive it. So the carved work is very intimate to me, but I think that the figures are perceived as more intimate. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. So when you think about setting up a metaphor, so for instance, wind, we can't, you can see wind in the trees, but you can't, often see it as if it's a personified. But when you carve it, you're almost showing the carving looks similar to like on a beach where the wind blows over top of the sand and it makes those ripples. I don't know what that's called, but whatever that process is called, it's very similar to that.
Yes.
So it's almost like you're showing the evidence of force. So can you talk about how you isolated that? Like how to describe something that you can't always see?
I just feel like it's what I felt. I'm putting what I feel into clay, into the work, or carving is a process of taking away. But I was always just trying to get in how it felt to be in that environment, or how it felt to move in that environment. So, or how it, felt on me. When you're running, people that don't run, I don't know if they're going to understand this, but I would run into the wind. And, growing up where I did, where we just had mile blocks, per se, county roads, mile blocks, it seemed like the wind was coming from three different directions. So if you ran around a county, mile, it seemed like you were fighting the wind from three directions. And there's only one where you got a break. So there was definitely this, concept of leaning into it and fighting it, and, the sort of burning in your muscles when that happens. But then the ease once you turn the corner and it pushes you, and why doesn't it feel why does the force when you're fighting against it seem so hard? And then why, when it's pushing you, does it seem like nothing? Except the fact that my hair is getting blown into my mouth, So there's definitely an aspect of like celebration, but also frustration of being out in the elements and fighting with them, or whatever. I just think that I feel like the work is quiet. I feel like the work is internal, and it's that there is that aspect of frustration, but I think that that's good. I think it's a good part of the work, if that makes sense.
Well, as you talk about running, running is always an inherent struggle, but I think for runners it feels pleasing. Like it's not, even though you might your legs might burn, your lungs might burn if it's really cold outside. Feeling embodied by running has some positive psychological effect, or at least it does for me. So can you talk about like the benefit of struggle when it comes to running?
Yeah, I mean, running has been the most consistent aspect of my life. I've been a runner longer than anything else, longer than education, longer than my marriage, longer than, being a mother. I mean, running has been with me. And at one point, I remember I was getting up so early to run because I just didn't have any other chance to do it. So I'd get up and it was dark out, and I'd go running and come back and then start my day. And it felt like this secret. It felt like this, this like, I don't know, like an affair or something.
Affair with
And
the road.
yeah, with myself. And it was so, I mean, of course I was tired, but it was this wonderful thing that I was giving to myself, doing for myself. The struggle of it, of course, is getting up and getting out there and doing it. But I'm telling you, man, I have never regretted a run. And sometimes that's my motivation is, oh, I don't want to get out of bed, but I've never regretted a run, just get up and go do it. And I mean, it's calming. It helps, with mental health. It's just such a great thing. I mean, and what I've done over the years is, yeah, I ran a marathon when I was in college, and yeah, I ran, on teams, and I walked onto the track team in college and all of that. But like, I've just made it so that I could keep doing it, and my goal is to run until I'm 60. So people think that I run a lot farther than I do, but or they're like, "You're vegetarian, aren't you?" And I'm like, "No, I'm just thin." But I think that I've made sure that I only run every other day and give myself a break in between. And if I'm feeling, under the weather, I take a little time off. So I've just made sure that I can keep doing it. And the the benefits outweigh the pain. The benefits outweigh you know, what I guess what would make people quit. And, the other thing is I just try to never stop so that I don't have to start up again because starting up sucks. Getting in shape is so hard. So I just don't ever stop, so I don't have to get back in shape again.
I think there's some wisdom to that in the studio also. I mean, as potters, there's such a daily rhythm of even if you don't make every day, just this idea that you're returning to something. And if the gap in between making gets bigger than the momentum of making, it's been very hard for me to start back. So I do the same as you. I tend to, with exercise and studio, just like, even if it's a little bit of work or a little bit of exercise, do something regularly.
Yes.
So, do your husband or kids run, or is running a solitary thing for you?
Well, right now my daughter is in track and she's running the hurdles. So I never pushed her to run. I always wanted her to do what she wanted to do. But I was thrilled when she decided to start running. She's done karate and she's done soccer, and of course we had her in gymnastics, and like we tried things out when she was little, and then she ended up going out for track and cross country, and it's just really exciting for me. So I am able to assist where she requests. I try not to say too much, but she's happy to have me at the meets, and I'm just really excited to watch her. So that's been really exciting. My son has special needs, so he's never been able to run. But we did go running together, quote unquote running together. He has a bicycle that it's a three-wheel bicycle. So he and I went out together. So we did actually go running together once, which was sort of a dream come true for me. It's always something that I wanted to do with my kids, but having them do what they wanted was always more important than, what I wanted them to do.
Yeah, I think running and biking, swimming, all these endurance sports are interesting because you can be on a team, a cross country team,
Right.
but you're always run. It's always you. You know, there's no collaborative effort there. But I think it's really important. I ran track in high school, and I was a sprinter, so I not a good distance runner, but love the feeling of win. The same thing you talk about being attracted to, or that, you know, sort of the struggle of pushing against the wind. I would run on an indoor track. Was running and basically played soccer outside and track inside, and we would run on these heavily banked tracks, like
Yes.
where the track is banked, and you would be running so fast that it's a weird feeling. You probably have felt this when you run into a banked surface. Your body keeps moving straight, but your whole alignment tilts.
Right.
But you're moving so fast that your own momentum carries you through. It's like a very weird thing.
Yeah, I did run one meet in college, but then I was injured, and so I had that experience once, and it's very different. And it was crazy to go from always running on an outdoor track to then all of a sudden running on an indoor track, and how small it was. It's like I just didn't know where I was at on the track because I hadn't had that experience of going around and around it, you know. But what was your race?
Well, they were weird distances because they were indoors. So we ran 55. That was like the equivalent of the 100, and then we ran the 300 relay because the tracks were smaller. So it wasn't quite a full track.
Right. Yeah.
But we would run through a tunnel also because it was in Southwest Virginia. It's not like we had amazing tracks, indoor tracks. So we would run into this tunnel at the Virginia Military Institute, and people would start punching you as you're going around because no one could see. So you'd
Yeah.
be running as fast as you can, and someone would hit you in the back.
Oh
But it
my.
was fun. I loved it actually.
Yeah. But you did relay. That's a team.
Yeah, that's true.
Cool.
Well, when you think about that transition into the figurative work, I wanted to think more about how you think about your body and how that is referenced in the work. So, at what point in your adulthood did you realize, or maybe this happened before that, where you realized, like, I am a person with a body, not a body controlling a person, if that makes sense? Like that your mind and body were separate.
I would say that that happened when I was about 6. There were a lot of things that I sort of came into or understood, in the 1st grade, and, it was, this clear distinction between boys and girls. Like understanding, "Okay, I'm a girl. What does that mean? What is a girl in this world?" And, of course, I wanted to be a boy, not because I actually wanted to be a boy, but because I wanted the power, and I don't think I wanted to be in charge, but I sure wanted to be in charge of myself. I didn't like this idea that the men were in charge and they told everyone else what to do, and the boys somehow were over us, even though they weren't any. I mean, yeah, they were faster, but, like, they weren't any better. Actually, the girls were better students. So I struggled with understanding that I was a girl in this world. Um, And, so yeah, that and well, and one thing that happened on the playground is I would play with these 2 boys. We would I it's silly to talk about this as an adult, but we would play monkey. And so 2 of them were monkeys. 2 of us were monkeys, and one person was like the man that caught the monkeys. Maybe it's because we read Curious George, I don't know. But, and we would always switch it up, who's the one chasing and who's the one running, right? So it's just our own version of tag. And there was one day that I outran, the tall boy with long legs, and I was so fucking proud of myself that I outran Matt Neff, because he was the fastest boy on the playground in the 1st grade, um, at Elmira. I mean, that was my world. Well, I didn't really know anything else, so that felt super empowering, on that day. And then I, and I think so understanding boys, girls, and, using my body to do the things that I wanted to, and all that stuff that you do on the playground, the witch's hat and swinging and climbing and all that stuff. I think I was just always very, um, very interested in what I could accomplish. And my dad was the type that was like, "We're going skiing," and he would just throw you in the water and you'd figure it out. So I think we were lucky, my older sister and I, we were lucky that our dad just did stuff with us, and we excelled at sports pretty easily, and so understanding, my body and sort of what it was capable of, and I think that happened really early. If that answers your question, I entered my first race when I was 8, and I got third. So a boy beat me, which just didn't count in my mind because he was a boy, and then my sister beat me, and I got third. So I was like, that's the best I could possibly do. But I remember it was only a mile and I was dying. Like, I just thought, I really thought that I was going to be able to go faster. And I thought it was going to be easier, and it wasn't. So maybe that struggle that I was talking about earlier was pretty apparent in that first race of thinking that you're going to do great, and then it just being so much harder than you thought it was going to. And we had this event in our town called the Carp Festival, and so it was all these, it was a parade and all this stuff that the town would come together and do, and they had this tractor pull where you would get on a tractor and you would try to go as far and as fast as you could, and the weight would come up, and it would get harder the farther you went. And you're watching everyone else, and it looks so hard for them, and you think you're going to do well, but then it's your turn and you do worse. So, you know, just having that sort of frustration with wanting my body to be able to do more, and just seemingly can't, was pretty young, I would say. Plus, I was always chasing my older sister and trying to do what she was doing, and trying to catch up and all that with her. Does that answer your question?
It does. Well, I'm thinking about how we grow into our body in different times. Like as children, you said like that first grade period. I'm thinking about this because I was just in Virginia seeing my nephew and niece. And my nephew is 7, my niece is 18 months. So they're very different
Oh, wow.
in their, there's a big spread there. But I've been thinking about how as artists, our body is our tool. Like that's the main thing. We use our hands. We can manipulate the potter's wheel. We can do all that, but it's really our body we're manipulating. But then we also grow into our mind later as psychological human beings. So whether that's puberty, whether that's adulthood, whatever it is, it's almost like there's two separate things. And when I look at the portraits that you do on your pots, they seem like psychological interpretations of the physical body. It's like a melding of the mind and the body. So can you talk about that sense of portraying a mental state with the physical body?
Yeah. So when I was in Georgia at that residency at Hambridge, of course I was going to look to myself because I know what it is to be a woman, right? So I'm going to reference the female form because I know what that feels like, and so I did that first, and I definitely used some images, and I definitely had images that I took with me to reference, but really it was more about how the hip feels when living in my body, being in my body, moving in my body, and how does that hip feel, sort of from the inside. And I was very reluctant to draw men because I don't know what it feels like to be a man. The closest I ever came was when I did walk onto the track team and we were lifting, constantly, and I bulked up and felt pretty powerful. I mean, we were sprinters, so we were doing explosive lifting, and the point was to get out of the blocks fast. And I just remember thinking, wow, this must be how guys feel. Like, I could ride my bike all over campus and not be tired, and go up and down the hills, and it was no big deal. And I felt like punching a wall, like there was this just different kind of energy that I had when I was on the track team doing all of that lifting and working out. And so, but I'm not there anymore. I don't have that power. I don't have the muscle. I don't have that explosion like I did all those years ago. I can remember it, but I don't have it. And so, what I have now is I've had 2 children. I've been pregnant. The babies have moved inside of me. I've given birth, it's different. And so I wanted to put how that feels into the work, which is very similar to what I talked about before, where wanting to put what it feels like to fight the wind, or wanting to put what it feels like to run. So it's all the same. It's just that the imagery has changed, or the way that I'm moving the clay has changed. Um, so I am putting the experience of being a woman into the work. It's not necessarily an idea, it's more of a feeling.
In terms of the way the poses that you put onto the pots, oftentimes the figure, I guess there's kind of a three or four different poses. One is almost like a reclining type figure. Um, Another is I don't know what this pose is called, but it's almost like you're sitting, leaning over your knees, almost like you're a protective stance. And then you'll portray that same stance from a different angle where you're really focusing on the hip. For instance, like in the bowls where you're seeing the figure really fill the bowl. So can you talk about picking a couple poses that you return to again and again in the work?
Yeah, that's a little harder to talk about, because I don't think that I have figured that out yet. Um, I think a lot of the images that I found, the girls were looking at the camera, and I didn't want that, but I don't really know why yet. I think, and people have sort of asked me, oh, this is about the male gaze. No, it's not. That's not what I'm exploring here. Um, I want women to be viewed as important, special. I want them to be treated well, with respect. There's these things that I want that are not necessarily a reality in this world. Certainly, there are some couples, and there are some, men who adore their wives or adore their girlfriends or whatever. But I think what I'm wanting is, hey, do you see how wonderful and amazing women are? Almost like, why wouldn't you see them as angels? Why wouldn't you see them as amazing creatures? Why wouldn't you see them as not something to worship per se, but, for lack of a better word, something to worship, rather than treat badly or disrespect or abuse, so like I said, this is difficult to talk about. This is good that we're doing this, but I want the sort of viewer to see her as beautiful, to see her as, the image that I'm portraying on the cup, amazing. And for some reason, the if and I've drawn a couple where the figure is looking at the, camera, or the viewer, but that's usually because I'm referencing a photograph. Um, and it's because that photographer had that model look at the camera, but that's really not what I'm exploring right now. But I wouldn't have known that unless I'd done that, piece, or that cup, or referenced that photo. So I might do a piece and then think, no, I want her to be looking away. So I don't quite know exactly what I'm going after yet, but I'm finding my way.
What seems as if we're looking in on the figure in a private moment. That's the feeling that I get, that it's more about we're witnessing an internal thought process. Maybe the woman is, thinking about what she's doing in the day, like whatever it is, it's not about interacting with the figure. It's about observing the figure, which also makes sense relative to the other. Like I see a lot of formal similarities between like the curve of a hip or a leg to the carved work you used to do, or that you still do, I think, at different times. So it's something about the drawn edge and the carved edge. They're formally similar, but the process is so different. So can you talk about learning to feel confident in this drawing process? It's like an inlay process. Can you talk more about developing skill at that?
Yes. In referencing the carved work and, the work that I had done previously, and me saying that that was all about the body, it's just that it wasn't apparent per se. So like if I was making a bowl, the outside curve of the bowl would be referencing the breast. but I wouldn't put a nipple on it, right? So it was an indirect reference. So I knew that the outside shape of the bowl was referencing that, or if I was throwing a cup, it was referencing the shape of the hip. But I wasn't broadcasting that. I wasn't talking about that. It was just, I knew that it was, and it didn't really matter to me if other people understood that or not. But I've always been looking at the form and the figure and putting it in the work. It just wasn't direct, or it wasn't easily understood by the viewer. So then to transition and start doing the inlay and to be putting actual lines into the work that do reference the hip and it's apparent or it's easily understood, to me that was seamless because I've been doing it all along. It's just that it's the way that I put it in changed. So to get comfortable with that process and to, start out at Hambidge and just pick up a pencil and draw the line that I was going to put on the cup. And then, I had a couple different knives that I was using down there to figure out how deep I wanted that carved line or how thick. And then once I returned, because all I did down at Hambidge was throw, draw, carve, and bisque. I didn't want to use my time to try to figure out glazing and fire a brand new kiln that I'd never fired before. That seemed kind of like a waste of time. So then I just shipped everything back and I figured out all the glazing and the firing once I got home. And so to use all of the cups that I made down there and use different oxides and washes and things like that to put in the inlay, and then of course fire those and see how they turned out and which direction I was going to end up going. That was a very interesting process, and I wish I had kept some of those, but of course we sell everything. we make, we sell. And so it would be kind of nice to have a couple of those back, but I do still have the original. I have the original, if anyone's interested. Yeah, to figure that out, that took a while, and some oxides would move and some wouldn't, some would bleed and some wouldn't. I tried out some underglazes and things like that, and then finally sort of stumbled upon this black that ends up firing blue. And then what was really fun is Pete Pinnell kind of got involved and was giving me some glazes and recipes and suggestions and things like that. And at first I was not really interested in what he had suggested. I wanted to sort of do this, on my own. But I mean, who can ignore Pete Pinnell? It's worth a try. So then he started tweaking this glaze and making it so that it would pull that oxide, and gravity would pull that oxide down, and that was really fun to work with him. So yeah, I sort of ended up with this black and moving clear that I really like, and people seem to be drawn to that. I was excited about what I was doing, and I was totally willing to just try things. So it was nice to have this array of things that worked and didn't work, but it was all beautiful. It's just more of choosing what my preference was. But what I love about the black glaze, the black underglaze with the moving clear, is that it creates shadows that don't exist if I do not use an underglaze that moves or that gets drawn down. And I do not have control over how much it gets drawn down or moves. That's a matter of where it's at in the kiln, gravity, and kind of like who knows, So when I open the kiln, I really don't know exactly what I'm going to find or see. And I like that. I like that every kiln load is a little bit different, and every kiln load is like Christmas. You don't quite know.
Well, we should describe a little bit your drawing style in terms of the physical form is very minimalist. Like you're often describing the body with one line, It appears to, I know it's not continuous, but it appears to be almost a continuous contour style line. But then things like hair, you're building up multiple lines together. And when you add that oxide and things start to run, hair has a quality of moving in the pot. So can you talk about depicting hair? I often hear figure sculptors and people that draw the figure, it's almost like hair is a genre in itself of the figure. Either you really get into that or you just decide like, I'm just going to not draw the hair.
Yeah, it's definitely not one continuous line, just saying. I have definitely learned how to use the knife. I've ended up landing on an X-Acto knife, but it has to be a specific blade. It's a slightly shorter blade, and it's the bevel on it is also short. And then how deep I cut makes a huge difference, and the direction that I start and stop also makes a difference. So there are lots of times that I'm carving and I have to turn the cut because I know that I have to start the line on this side for it to look the way I want it to. So there's been a huge learning curve, and there's a lot of time that I take when I unload a kiln, looking at the work and sort of taking mental notes and seeing what works and what doesn't work for me. And but then to talk about hair, I didn't do a whole lot of hair in the beginning just because I hadn't gotten to that step yet. So I would maybe outline the head, but there wasn't a whole lot of description or detail with the hair. But then once I sort of felt like I got my head wrapped around the body, then I could play around with the hair more. And the hair is the easiest part of the figure. So it's the fun. It's sort of the fun part. It's the work hard and get the figure right, and then woohoo, I get to do the hair. So it's been this treat, sort of. It's like dessert, at the end. And I don't know if anyone has noticed in any of the videos, if they've watched any of them, but I start. I basically, when I do the figure, it's as if you're writing on a piece of paper, so that I never put my hand down on what I just carved. So I work from left to right, because I'm right-handed, and because I use my pinky and use my hand to sort of prop my hand on the cup so that I can draw. So then a lot of times I'll start at the toes, and then I get to the hair if I'm doing a reclining figure, and then that's the play aspect of the piece. And anyone that has worked in the studio with me, I've had a couple student workers come in and help with things, or I've done some demos. I've been a visiting artist before COVID, and I'll just say I can't talk during this. So I might be like, gather around, feel free to watch. I don't care if you are leaning your head on my shoulder, but I cannot talk while I'm carving. So it takes a great deal of concentration for me still at this point. Someday maybe I'll be able to chit chat while I'm doing it, but not yet.
You mentioned that you start at one side and work to the other. So does that mean there's no underdrawing or like sketching with a pencil or anything? You're just literally, it all comes out, left or right? How do you figure out proportion is maybe the better way to ask that question.
Oh no, when I said that I carve from left to right, that's once the drawing is down. So I do draw with the pencil first. And I figure all of that out with the pencil because I can erase the pencil. I just dip my finger in water and, rub it out. So yeah, I get the figure figured out with the pencil first. And then once I'm happy with the lines of the pencil, then I pick up the X-Acto knife and carve. Yeah, I have to do the pencil first.
Well, I've seen sometimes artists, often painters that are drawing that have this ability to just render the body almost offhand. Like their concept of the body is such that they don't make large proportional errors. I am the opposite. Like if I did not sketch the body, one arm would be like twice as big as the leg. It would be not a good situation.
Well, I mean, and I don't know if you've seen the luster cups, but there's, cups that I've made where it's a porcelain cup that's thrown and fired and glazed and all of that, and then I take gold or silver luster, and then, I'm drawing the figure with that, so that's a completely different process, and doing the luster cups has actually helped me with the carved cups because I had to be very selective with the lines that I chose. The luster only goes so far with the brush. There are many lines that I would use that would describe two parts of the body with one line. And like I said before, the direction matters. So, where I start and where I lift off um, gives a different mark. So, and also how much luster is on the brush. I mean, there's all these little tiny, every artist knows this. There's all these little tiny things, these little decisions that you make that go into the final piece that matter. And that of course goes back to that level of critique that you have in graduate school. And sometimes it just might feel like we're arguing about things for hours, but it matters. It all matters. It makes a difference in what you want to say or how you want to say it.
I got to spend some time with some cups of yours at Strictly Functional a couple years ago. And when I think that might have been the first time I handled the work in person. And one of the things I was the most surprised at is the weight of the cup felt substantial, and it
Yes.
was pleasing. Like it surprised me that they were heavier, but it didn't come off as heavy. It came as full. That like the pot had a sense of volume visually, but also weight wise. So can you talk about figuring that out?
Yeah, that is 100% deliberate. I want the work to have substance. I want, when you reach out and pick it up, I want there to be a little bit of resistance and I want there to be a little bit of surprise. So I purposefully leave them thicker. Um, and yeah, I like the density of porcelain. I'm not using porcelain for the translucency, that's for sure. I'm using it for the whiteness. I'm using it for the ring. I love how it sounds, even just having your fingers on it, not even if there's a ring involved, but just the way it sounds in your hands. And so, yeah, I want that weight to be there. I do want it to carry meaning. Again, that's hard to put into words. The reality of life, sometimes the idea of something is completely different than once you jump in and do it. I mean, if someone's like, "Oh, yeah, I wanna have kids," and I'm like, "Why?" And they're like, "I don't know, I think I'd be a good parent." Like, the reality of having a baby? Yeah, wow. There's life before and there's life after, and you can't go back, you know? So, I mean, you're creating another person. That that's heavy, you know? So, yeah, I totally want there to be a weight when you pick up my work.
And they're often altered from the inside, or it appears to be altered from the inside, so that way the thickness of the wall affects like that undulation.
Yeah, so are you asking why I, alter from the inside?
Well, yeah, that, but also how the drawing is then affected by the form being altered.
Yeah, so, I wanted to alter from the inside, now obviously my carved work, that's, altered from the outside, and that's different, that's taking clay away, but these cups, these figurative cups and how I alter them from the inside, I wanted to talk about, skin over ribs and, that sort of protrusion, and, I mean, of course, I'm in love with the hip bone, but wanted it to be like a hip, sticking out, and what better way to do that than alter from the inside? So some people think that I like take my finger and do it, because I mean that's what a lot of potters do. But I put my whole hand in, and I use my hand, and I use my knuckles, um, and then there's a lot of like swiping, and it's sort of immediate. It's not as if I really have control. It's a pretty quick movement. So, I mean, I've done it enough to know what I'm doing, but it's not as if I don't know how exactly they're going to turn out, which I love, and I love that each one is unique. I know about what's going to happen, but not actually what's going to happen. Um, so I definitely wanted to alter from the inside because I think that portrays the figure more um, than altering from the outside. And I also don't want it to be so deliberate. I want it to be like moving. I want it to be how the body moves. And then the figure on the outside, you asked. A lot of time, my actual favorite cup to make, or the most invigorating cup to make, is when I pick it up and I just turn it around. I look at it and I sort of see what the alteration gave me, and then finding the figure within that alteration. Those are the most unique. They take the most time, and that takes some imagination. So I look at something, I'm like, okay, that could be an elbow, but then what? And then I sort of make the figure based on the form. Some of the cups are more, front, back, figures on the front. Some of these angel cups that I've done with the wings, that's a little different. That's a little more just a drawing on the cup. But I do place it, intentionally.
We should say that you live in Nebraska. You live in a town, obviously, but it is a rural state, not the most progressive state. So when you started selling cups with nude figures on them, what was the audience reaction when you're selling locally versus when you're shipping those cups off to exhibitions in other states?
Right. There was definitely a little bit of pushback, and I felt like I needed to be careful and considerate and kind. But what was so exciting is when, individuals would come into my booth and they'd be just talking to their friend and, oh, look at this. This is so beautiful. And then it would dawn on them, oh, it's a figure, especially the reclining figures, where a reclining figure is a landscape, right? So they would just see it and like it. So they liked it first, and then they realized it was a figure. And then, I mean, it's cute to see what people say. Oh, it's a naked lady. It's a nude. We call it figure drawing. I mean, but all of the work that I had done with the non-major drawing students, that was good prep for me, because students would say whatever was on their mind. Are you kidding me? We're going to draw someone buck naked. And, and I'm like, well, if I can just talk about the history of figure drawing, or, talk about this is actually a really respectful environment. I mean, can you really think of any more respectful environment than figure drawing, where, you're paying this individual and it's a privilege to be able to study their body? I think it's even more respectful than the medical community and how they treat bodies, because it's almost like they remove the person. And so as respectful as the medical community is toward a body, I actually think that artists are more respectful. So I think all of the prep that I had teaching figure drawing and sort of preparing students, hey, we're going to have a figure, let's talk about where you see bodies. And I just kind of talk with them about, we see bodies at the beach, we see bodies in the locker room, we just talk about it, and I sort of get them mentally ready to look at someone who, is derobed. And so I think that helped a lot in, working with the public and answering questions about what I'm doing, why I'm doing it. And so I think people's responses and reactions were actually really good. But that is in part due to the way I set up my booth, where I put the figurative cups, the distance that I have. I mean, all of this is considered. So it's almost as if I made their experience positive. It's not I'm not an in your face kind of a person, and there's nothing wrong with that. if people want to be in your face, I mean, I've met artists like that, and that's something to celebrate as well. But for where I came from, and the upbringing that I had, it was definitely more of a quiet experience.
I think too that there's a distinction between nakedness and nudity, and
Yeah.
or the state of being nude. Because nakedness feels like someone took your clothes, or like you're being exposed, and that feels like, oh, that's not a good thing. But a nude figure feels powerful, and I think you're depicting women in a powerful state, not in a state of weakness. And I think the way you're talking about how you set the booth up, it's almost how you're setting the expectation for the viewer by how you display the object. I think that makes a difference, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, I've really gotten a positive response overall. So it's been really good. And I didn't when I first put them out, I didn't know if people would even like them. I loved them, but I didn't know if people would. And I was very pleasantly surprised. And the first show that I showed the work, they sold out. So then I was like, well, I guess I need to make more. I get to make more.
There's a funny thing in our society where in a figure drawing class, when someone is nude, it's a state of reverence. Like I notice students become quiet. Like they often will stop talking. It's almost like you're looking at something that is so profound that you don't know what to say, so you just stop saying anything, which is one thing. But then on the other hand, when you see not nudity but nakedness in public, whether when it has more of a sexual content, it's so different in our society. It's often in loud environments. It's this thing that's like I don't know how to describe what I'm thinking, but there's just such a difference in scenery and how you look at the figure and how you're setting that up on the pots.
Right. I mean, you're right to say that it's as if someone is, seeing the figure in a quiet moment, or she's, in her own thoughts, that there's not necessarily an interaction, and that it is that empowering or powerful moment for the figure on the pot. I mean, I have done a little bit of research with maybe Mary Cassatt, or a woman in the bath, and that's sort of the vibe I'm going for. Is she just took her bath, and that feeling that you have where your whole body's hot because you're sitting in the water. And yeah, it is very empowering, or it is very powerful, and it is a celebration, and it's not a show, that's for sure.
So you have a group of work that's featured at In Tandem, which is a gallery in North Carolina. Can you talk about making a larger batch of work to send off? Because you've mentioned before that you work slow and in a thoughtful way, piece to piece. So how does that work when you have to add up all these pieces and ship them out?
Well, I think the way that I worked different for Tandem was that everything I was making was for Tandem. So, I mean, I certainly make that much work at a time. I do want to fill my kiln, but it was selective, and I wanted the work to go together. So it was not, okay, this commission, that commission, that commission, it was not this sort of segmented out group of pots that were going in the kiln together. It was all the work in the kiln was for Tandem. And how is it all going to communicate and talk with each other? So I definitely wanted the same pose multiple times. I definitely wanted specific forms, and I chose not to pursue the most recent sort of jump that I made was with these decals, exploring the decals. And so I had already shipped a couple of pieces to Tandem, and that there was one decal piece there. But I think they asked for work like 3 months ahead of time. So I had to gather up what was reminiscent of my work. What do I want to represent myself for this show in 3 months? And so I gathered the best of what I had and shipped that off. So there was one piece with the decals, but the rest of the work I decided just to pare back and just have the figurative work. and have that sing. Um, so it was more about like pairs and groups, and and then I wanted a variety of size of those bowls so that people could sort of handpick what they wanted. Um, but you can see if you look at all the bowls, if you lined all the bowls up, you can see where I was making, and then I just had to do something different. So one of them has, you know, curly hair. So I just can't. I'm just not a production potter. I just have to, even if I have this plan of, okay, I'm going to make 8 of them and they're all going to be the same. I can't. I have to do something different, or I have to explore something, or I have to turn the foot or whatever, you know, flip this foot up. So I definitely need variety in when I'm making, or something just a little bit different from the last one. Keeps it fun.
There's a scale of the work in the show that is, you know, cups, bowls, all these smaller handheld things where you're really interacting with the pot, you know, through holding. Have you ever have you ever made work that's really large scale so that it can only be viewed? It cannot really be handled.
Have I ever?
Yeah. Or talk to me about why the smaller scale is important. Do you ever work larger, and does that shift the way you think about it?
Well, I definitely worked larger when I was younger. I definitely worked larger in undergrad and grad school. And that was a little bit more about pushing limits, or just seeing if I could, or, you know, how tall can I throw, that kind of thing, you know, just exercising as a young potter. And But I just think that that didn't speak to me as much as these cups do, you know. And I mean, you know, there's a lot of talk in the potter world about cups and how intimate they are, and that it's artwork that touches your lips, you know. Um, so I like that concept, and I feel like the cups with the figures on them are so versatile, and I really like that sort of inside outside, the fact that you're holding the outside but you're interacting with the inside. Um, it's a little different with the bowls. The bowls, yes, there's an inside outside, but it's a completely different setup. And there's so much more interaction with the interior. And, you know, I must say that drawing on the interior is so much more difficult than drawing on the exterior. There's so much figuring out how to hold my hand, hold the bowl, hold the knife to make it work. So the bowls might seem simpler, but they're very tricky to maneuver and operate with. So the cups, well, the pose for the bowls, I feel like is more intimate because she's all wrapped up in there. And there's just something about that. And the fact that she doesn't go past the lip of the bowl. But the cups, I feel like there's just so much more open space, and I can interact with it differently. But how I interact is different than how the, you know, person who purchases it interacts.
Well, the bowls I think are so beautiful because the figure is filling, like you mentioned, that it's contained within the bowl, but it's filling outward in a way that it appears that you're very close physically to the figure, as if you're almost right behind the person.
Yes.
Which, it's interesting, that intimacy, that like very close view is the opposite of containment. It almost feels like it's uncontained, you know, like it's pushing out of there and it's right there with you, which I think is amazing. Those are some of my favorite pieces in the show because they have this sense of expansion, visual expansion, that is just amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, you are very close. And there's definitely some foreshortening going on. Some of those feet look really big, but if you're that close, they're going to. Yeah, I'm pretty invested in those.
Well, can you plug the dates for that show and also the website where people can buy the work?
Ooh, yeah. So the show opened May 1st. It'll run through the month. And then the website is www.intandemgallery.com. And the gallery is in Bakersville, North Carolina.
And then also, can you leave your social media and website as well so people could get in touch if they want to chat about any of this we've talked about?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram everything that I have, whether it's Facebook or Instagram or whatever, is Amy Smith Porcelain. So my handle is Amy Smith Porcelain, and my website is, www.amysmithporcelain.com. So however you need to find me, whatever platform you're on, just search that. Amy Smith Porcelain was not taken when I bought a website. Of course, Amy Smith Ceramics was, or Amy Smith was gone, but Amy Smith Porcelain I got.
Thanks for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it.
Oh, Ben, thank you so much for asking me.
I'd like to thank Amy for taking the time to do this interview. It was nice to sit and chat with her about her work. Also wanted to thank today's sponsor, the Kansas City Clay Guild. They are now accepting applications for their annual T-Ball National. The exhibition has a $500 Best in Show, as well as other prizes including purchase and equipment awards. You can apply today before their June 25th deadline at kcclayguild.org/apply. I'll be back next week with another episode. Thank you guys for tuning in. If you'd like more information on the artists on the show, or if you'd like more information about the workshops and events that I'll be having in the next couple months, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook under Carter Pottery. Another great way to support the show is to leave me a comment on iTunes. To do that, search Tales of a Red Clay Rambler under iTunes Podcasts, and you'll find a page that's linked to our show. Thank you guys for the support.